In conversation with Moz Murray. Moz Murray, known as Ramana Baba in India, is a mystic, spiritual master, and mantra yogi, and one of the rare Westerners to have experienced cosmic consciousness and obey Samadhi and a near-death experience. He spent 3 years as a wandering sadhu all over India, studying with masters of many traditions in order to consolidate his experience, and has taught his spiritual insight to seekers worldwide for half a century. His earlier career began as a surrealist painter, actor, and set and costume designer for the theater, later becoming founder editor of Gandalf Garden Mystical magazine and community in the London 60s. 3 years economist for Yoga Today magazine, scriptwriter and narrator for BBC 4, co-editor of the Mountain Path Journal India, and author of 5 spirituality-oriented books and 2 children's books. Some people call him Gandalf. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy and excitement to have on the show today, Moz Murray. How are you doing today, Moz?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot, Peter. I'm very happy to be here. I've seen many of your interviews, and so I'm quite honored to be among all these illustrious other authors.
Yes, my pleasure having you on the show today. Really quite exciting. We're here to talk about your book. So, Mars, let's first kick off the origin, and your inner awakening and focus on the mystical experience. Your early journey and transformation. Your mystical awakeness in Syrops reads like a spiritual explosion. It is quite profound, it is quite unexpected and life altering. Now, I wanted to ask you, how did you emotionally and intellectually integrate that experience in the years that followed, especially in the absence of a guide or teacher at first?
I'd set off on my travels as a rather raw, rapscallion lad from Coventry without a religious or spiritual bone in my body and a healthy distrust of such matters. I was intending to hitchhike around the world to test my capacities and endurance in every possible way I could. I really wanted to find myself, and when I did, I wished I'd found somebody else. Anyway, after a few misadventures, I finally got to Israel, where I stayed for a whole year, working in many different kinds of jobs. I started on a kibbutz, then I went down to Eilat on the Red Sea, where I got a job on a ship sailing for Japan. But the captain went mad halfway down Africa, so we had to turn back. So then I went and got a job drilling for copper in King Solomon's mines in the Israeli desert. Absolutely horrendous. So I went to Tel Aviv and got a job as scenic artist, holiday relief for the National Theatre, painting scenery. And then I worked in the zoo looking after hippos, giraffes, and elephants, which I was learning to train. And then ended up singing in a nightclub. One other nightclub owner came along and said, "I'll give you more money if you come and work in my nightclub." So I said, "Sure." So as soon as I did, the first club owner was pretty miffed, and he ratted to me. He ratted to the authorities that I'd overstayed my permit and I was likely to be arrested. So I had to skip the country as quickly as I could, and I took a boat to Cyprus in the Mediterranean. However, somebody stole my bag with all my money in it, and so I arrived there with £7.50 in my pocket. And there I was stuck, not knowing which way to turn. I wanted to go to India, really, but on £7.50, there was no way I was going to be able to do that. So there I was, wondering what I must do from there on. And I was just sitting on a bollard top on the quayside in Limassol, watching the sun go down. And suddenly I had this very weird feeling that a ghostly hand was creeping up the back of my neck and uh, placing a liquid or etheric brain on top of mine. And my consciousness seemed to go out into space, out into the universe, across the land, across the oceans. And I found myself everywhere in the universe at one and the same time. And I was everything in the universe. And it was like I had a fly's eye with thousands of lenses, and I could see everything happening all at the same time. And it came to me that this was what the priests blithely blag about without having any notion of what God is. And it came to me, this is God. And of course, when I said that, my normal consciousness came swooshing back into my brain, and I came back into my normal body. But I had had revelation after revelation of how everything worked in the spiritual field that was being recorded into my cellular system. I wondered what I could do next, and I had this crazy idea that I might get a job in Kenya because it was the British protectorate at the time. And never mind, it was 3,000 miles down Africa and with in fact, the boat to Alexandria cost £6. So I only had 50p left when I arrived in Egypt. And somehow I got to Cairo, put myself in a little pension, and no idea how to pay for it. But in a few days of starvation, I managed to wangle myself a job as art director for the Cairo television, as I'd had experience in theatre and BBC TV before that. So I was taken on. And in my spare time, I used to haunt the British Library, British Consul Library, which was a haven of peace in the chaotic cacophony of Cairo. And there I found a book called Cosmic Consciousness by Dr. Maurice Buck, who was a psychiatrist in a Canadian mental hospital. And he was also a friend of Walt Whitman, the poet. And he outlined everything that he could find that happened to people as far back as he could research who had had this experience called cosmic consciousness and how it changed their lives and changed the lives of people around them.
Mm, that's a fantastic one, really. Thank you. So, Moz, you describe a shift from anti religious skepticism to spiritual devotion. What softened your resistance? Was it the experience itself or something deeper within you that was always seeking, even when the mind said no? I'm just curious.
On leaving my job, I took a ship down the Nile to Aswan and rode on the roof of a train to Khartoum in Sudan and crossed the Sudanese desert to Ethiopia and down through very dangerous country to Kenya, having several very hairy adventures along the way. As I was traveling, the spiritual influence in my cellular system slowly began to wean me away from blood foods such as meat, fish, eggs. I felt as if ingesting blood of animals was bringing me down. And I gave up tobacco. I threw my pipe and tobacco pouch in the Nile, and I finally stopped drinking alcohol. So what happened in Cyprus was always filtering through my consciousness. And I really wanted to meet someone who had the spiritual insight and depth that was given to me. And it wasn't until I arrived in Johannesburg in South Africa that I was passing by a bookshop and I saw a photograph of the sage Ramana Maharishi. And that was the photo that I saw. And I stopped, transfixed, and I said, he knows. My psychic awareness had kicked in, and I went in and bought the book. And voila. Of course, any lingering doubts I might have had vanished on reading his experience and teachings, which, although cryptic to some, were perfectly clear to me. I guess I was always seeking to understand something more of myself and wanting to know what was the point of existence. Even at the age of 8, I was nauseated by the smarmy piety of Christian good bodies at Sunday school, laying their saccharine sweet version of Jesus on us kids. With a piercing insight, I knew they neither believed nor understood what they were telling us kids. And I walked out and I vowed never to go into a church again. And so all through my teenage, I prided myself on being a professional atheist and anti anything that smelled of religiosity or spirituality. Not that I had the remotest idea of what that was. So my about face was all the more astonishing to me. So yes, it was the cosmic conscious experience that changed everything for me.
That's an amazing answer to that. I must say, I love your take on that. Quite beautiful and quite awesome. Thank you very much for sharing with us. Now, Moz, I'd like us to dive into your quest for self-realization, as we focus more on ego, mind, subconsciousness, and spiritual practice. You frequently distinguish between the mind and the subconscious. Could you describe what it's like to live from the subconscious in day-to-day life? How does one know they are truly there and not just imagining it?
I like to posit the sun consciousness as the opposite pole of unconsciousness. Unconscious is a matter of flooding your so called mind with light rather than the darkness of fear, worry, apprehension, or poor me consciousness. And to do this, I created a method I call Surya Dhyana in Sanskrit, which is a fixation of consciousness on a ball like the sun in the center of your being that expands on the in breath and radiates on the out breath through the cells out into the world. And many students have found this makes them feel more loving and less afraid of the world and more stable inside. In fact, I discovered much later that this practice was actually used thousands of years ago by tantric adepts for similar purposes. And if you feel better when practicing this, then you know it's real. Actually, I have a CD with the practice available on my website as well as the explanation in my book. But if you're talking about self-realization, then you can only know you're there if you no longer have any fear, or if mental worries have vanished, or the sense of I no longer occurs in your consciousness. If you're no longer striving for anything and you are feeling whole in yourself, you're pretty much on the way.
Yeah, I must say that's a lovely response you've got in there. I love your take on that. Quite beautiful and quite awesome. Now, Moss, according to your book, you speak of spiritual effort as both necessary and ultimately unnecessary. How does one know when to push and when to surrender? Is there a sign or internal compass that helps one navigate that paradox? I'm just curious.
Well, if you still feel a spiritual emptiness, if you're dissatisfied with your progress and you still need a mentor, then spiritual effort is absolutely necessary. But when you come to feel that all striving is useless, that is the time to surrender. Your spiritual heart is your compass, not your mind. You have to live from the spiritual heart. You have to feel it at all times. Then it will guide you. Yogis understand that there's a spiritual heart on the right side, and even the Bible says the fool's heart is on the left and the wise man's heart is on the right, which echoes the yogi's perception. So the sun conscious practice will help you feel that as it keeps your awareness fixed in the center of your being. And that is the true place of consciousness, where it arises each morning before it hits the brain. You know, when people are falling asleep sitting upright, their head goes down. Well, their consciousness is withdrawing down into the heart center.
That's a great one you've mentioned in there. I love your extensive answer to that. And I've been enjoying your answers to these questions really so far. Thank you. That's quite amazing. Thank you. Now, Moss, here is also another important question that drives my curiosity quite hard while reading your book. You know, you say that the ego is like a psych shell protecting us until we are mature enough to break free. But in a culture that celebrates ego as identity, how can one dismantle that shell without psychologically fragmenting it?
Oh boy, this is a huge subject. I have 17 pages in Sharing the Quest in which I go deeply into this phenomenon. Ego isn't a thing, it's a psychological mechanism of repulsion and retraction. You can observe its functioning in yourself. And if you can watch its operation, then it is not you. You were not born with it. For approximately the first 3 years of life, you lived happily without it. Then, when the brain was fully operational around the 3rd year, this somewhat schizophrenic attitude began to come into play. So the first step is watching whenever the sense of ego appears in your consciousness and stepping back from it because you are in charge. Don't allow the ego sense to control you, as many people do, believing they are the ego sense. Understand that ego is the source of every negative emotion you have ever had. It brings misfortune, calamity, competition, aggression, family arguments, sadism, exploitation, crime, violence, rape, evil, torture, murder, war, you name it. Ego identification is the cause. Without ego, none of these attitudes would arise. That should be enough to make you step back from it.
Mm, that's a fantastic one, really. Thank you. Thank you for this lovely illustration, amazing answers you've got in there. Quite beautiful and quite awesome. Now, Moss, let's get into the Guru verse. I must confess that this is the first time I have heard it as a word. I was initially. Your image of the Guruvas is both poetic and revolutionary in style. You painted it as a world where everything is the teacher. In your view, I wanted to ask you what distinguishes a true guru from simply life happenings?
I'm not surprised you've never heard of it. It's a word I coined myself after my cosmic conscious experience. I perceived the whole universe as the guru. The two syllables gu and ru mean dispeller of darkness, and the universe brought light to the darkness of my ignorance. And I came to realize that everything that happens in this dream of existence happens in order to teach us something. It's happening for us, not to us. Life happening is the true guru. But if we talk about a spiritual mentor, then a true guru will not impose anything upon you. He will simply put your problems to rest. He's not interested in controlling you, and beware of those who are. He won't weigh you down with a cartload of unnecessary practices. He will simply put your mental perspective on the right path, maybe by suggesting one simple mental method. That's all.
That's a great one, really. Thank you. And Moose, you embraced insight from mystic of many traditions, including the Sufis, Zen monks, rabbis, shamans. Was there ever a moment when conflicting doctrine made your path confusing, or did they always harmonize on a deeper level? I'm just curious as well.
That never happened. Because of the universal vision I was given, it was always easy for me to discern just what was intellectual teaching and what was real spirituality. So I could just absorb what was useful in any teaching and blend it into my own understanding or knowledge base.
I love your take on that. That's very great. Now, Moose, let's close the question on universal spirituality with this. In today's world of spiritual influencers and monetized wisdom, which is quite very common, actually, you can see it all over the social media spaces. Now, what advice would you give to a seeker looking for authentic guidance and not just charismatic performance?
Basically, they need to practice discernment, shop around a lot, look at different teachers. Are they mighty talkers or do they quietly disseminate their knowledge? Hang out with them when they're off stage, so to speak, and see if they walk their talk. Do they still have ego in certain situations or do they proceed with equanimity? You'll gradually come to understand who arouses love in your heart.
Mm, amazing. Yeah, very great. Thank you. Now, Mos, to discuss contemplation and daily life, you write about washing away the mental shatter to access the self. What are some everyday practices or small rituals that have helped you maintain that clarity through the chaos of modern life? I would love your answer to this, actually.
Well, I practiced several forms of meditation for 16 years, the same meditation for 12 years, and others uh, for the next few years. But I was never really satisfied that I was getting anywhere. But that was one of the problems. Striving to reach something like self consciousness or super consciousness was like the donkey straining to reach the carrot dangling on the end of a stick. It will never reach it. Meditation should be done just to remain aware of your inner space. but it was mainly the practice of mantra and Surya dhyana that kept me focused. Mantra, in the tantric way I teach it, is the quickest way to get students into a state resembling samadhi, or the state of attunement to the omnipresence without any mental functioning occurring. But eventually, it was withdrawing from the notion of me, as taught by the sages, that brought me to a real comprehension of the self, or the essence of being. And that leaves me untouched by the insanity of this chaotic world.
Thank you for that. That's a good one. Thank you. Now, Moz, from popular opinion, once one has a taste of the inner way, it can be a little complex to avoid diving into it wholly. However, you cautious that one should not take the path too seriously, quote unquote. Now, how does one walk the razor's edge between deep spiritual discipline and light-hearted presence without falling into either self-importance or spiritual apathy? I would like your answer to that as well.
Take the quest as a light-hearted journey to where you already are. That's the spiritual joke once you see it. The spiritual quest is like someone standing in Trafalgar Square and asking the way to London. There is nowhere to get. You are already at the journey's end. Don't be a donkey when you are already the carrot that you're trying to reach. When the I and the ego, two sides of the same coin, are relinquished, then it's impossible to fall into self-importance or spiritual apathy. Self-realization is not something spectacular, as many so-called gurus would like you to think. It is consciousness resting in compassion and contentment without the interference of mind, and being aware of the beingness of existence at all times. This may be a difficult concept to conceive, but I explain everything. Many of these questions are explained more fully in the book, and readers may find answers they've long been looking for. Quite a few readers have told me the last chapter especially saved them from the dark night of the soul, or the malady of soul sickness, as I prefer to call it, a spiritual state that afflicts many seekers and is not given the attention it deserves.
Mm, mm. That's a great one, really. That's quite amazing. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Moz Murray's books directly on Amazon and Barnes& and Nobles on his website and also another platform. I also left a link to Moz Murray's social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Moz, for accepting the invitation to be featured on the show today. It's really great having this conversation with you.
Thank you for having me. I really had a good blast with you, so enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure as well.